Amongst all of the other end of year content, I may have forgotten to wrap up December, but I read some really good books this month, so I want to talk about them today. Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. My name is Brie and this is 4 Paws in a Book. Like I said, I'm going to be wrapping up the books that I read in December of 2024. The very last 2024 wrap up. I feel like I always forget to do these at the end of the year because we just kind of like move right into new year content, end of year content, wrapping up the whole year, and so then we forget about the rest of the stuff we did in December. But I had a really good reading month. I did a lot of things for vlogs, so I will be linking you back to a lot of those videos because I read 20 books and I DNF'd another one. So we have a lot of books to talk about today. I'm actually going to be doing them in chronological order and kind of like grouping up the books that I read for vlogs rather than trying to do it in like star rating order or anything like that. But I did read 20 books. I DNF'd one more. Now you're like, Brie, that's a lot of books. That's more than you read most of the time. 8 of them were Christmas novellas and short stories that were under 80 pages long, so the number is a little skewed. But I had a good time, I had a lot of fun with them, and we'll talk about it. I read 8 books via audio, I read 7 books via ebook only, and then 5 books were read with a mixture, so I either immersion read them, or I read them physically for a little while and then listened to them on audio, kind of went back and forth. I love being able to do that, especially with my Kindle and using WhisperSync. So I'll be reading it on my Kindle and then I get in the car, I go, you know, drive to work or whatever, and it automatically brings me to the spot in the audiobook that I'm on. 18 of the books that I read were for an adult audience, 2 of them were for a YA audience. And for my star ratings, I definitely was like all over the place. My average was a 3.4, which is kind of low. I had 2 2-stars, 1 2.5 stars, 7 3 stars, 3 3.5 stars, 4 4 stars, 2 4.5 stars, and 1 5-star. And that 5-star was a book that I was talking about on my best books of the year, so I definitely ended out very strong. We were definitely bringing in the fantasy romance vibes this month as I was trying to close out the Goodreads Romantasy vlog, and then I just like kind of continued on. I'm in my Romantasy era, what can I tell you? I read 8 fantasy romance books in December, 1 horror, 9 romance books, which were all of like the Christmas novellas, 1 sci-fi, and 1 thriller. Alright, so the first set of books I read for the Goodreads Romantasy vlog that I did, I was reading as many of the top 10 in the Goodreads Choice Awards for Romantasy as I could. Didn't get to all of them, but I did a pretty good job. So the first one I'm going to talk about is When the Moon Hatched by Sarah A. Parker. I ended up giving this one 3, maybe 3.5 stars. Listen, I would be convinced to continue on with the series. I would definitely have to reread it, but I keep seeing this book on everyone's best books of the year, and I just feel so let down by it because I feel like I didn't get the same thing out of it that everyone else seems to. The concept of this is so interesting. We have a very political fantasy. We have these dragons that are such intricate characters, but unfortunately I was so confused by this book. This book is very much overwritten in some places and then underwritten in others. Trust me, I know what every blade of grass looks like in this world, but I don't know why the dragons fall to the earth. I don't know how it affects the people around them. I don't know the important things about this book. I don't know, either I missed something or I just went in with different expectations. It wasn't a win for me, unfortunately, but I would be convinced to continue the series. The next book does come out in 2025, so I would be convinced, but I would definitely have to reread this book and maybe not do it with the audiobook. Maybe that's part of the problem. For that blog, I also read A Fate Inked in Blood by Danielle L. Jensen. This one I gave 4 stars, and I actually really enjoyed this one. The vibes of this book, immaculate, okay? It is a Viking Norse-inspired fantasy. It jumps you right into the action. The first chapter, you are just thrown right into the story, and that was something that like immediately gripped me, right? I had been reading so many fantasy romance books up until this point that I was starting to get a little bit burned out, but this one really rejuvenated me and really kind of like got me back into the world, got me back into reading the genre or the subgenre, and it was just so interesting. She is such a badass woman. She is very strong, and she kind of takes things on her own, even though like there are people trying to help her. She wants to do stuff on her own. This is a book that I will definitely be continuing on with the second book that comes out in 2025. I will be pre-ordering it. It's also gonna have really cool sprayed edges. It's definitely a vibes book. It's larger than you might think. Like, it is a over 400-page book, but there are definitely things that I think we could have expanded on, but it's definitely a series I will continue, and an author that I'm going to be reading more from. I also have The Bridge Kingdom from her, and I'm really intrigued by that one after really enjoying this. Then I read House of Flame and Shadow, the third Crescent City book, and I was pleasantly surprised by this one. It had been such a long time since I had been in this world, and there were times when I was reading the second one last month where I was like, I understand the foundation that Sarah J. Maas laid for the romantasy genre, but there's so much better out there now. And going into this one, reading House of Flame and Shadow, I also believe that is true. This one is like probably the least romantasy of all of the ones that were in the top 10, so it's a little bit disappointing that she won, although it's not surprising at all. I would definitely classify this more as an urban fantasy, especially as we continue on with this series. This is the third book in the series, so we have a very large, extensive cast at this point. And honestly, we don't see Bryce and Hunt for the majority of the book. They're there, they're in the background, but they aren't the only main characters. And I feel like when you have a romantasy, the romance has to be part of the big plot, right? And I feel like this one, it has so much more of an ensemble cast. There's not a lot I can talk about this book because obviously it is the third and final book in the series, or at least it's like the most up-to-date one in the series. I don't know that it's going to be the last one. Couldn't tell ya. And yeah, I had a fun time with it. I had a good time. I really liked the action and the tension that we had in the book, but the romance was severely lacking. But I did give it 3.5 stars. And then my last romantasy for this vlog was The Spell Shop by Sarah Beth Durst. This one is definitely more of a cozy fantasy than it is romantasy. Listen, we have to figure out the definition of this subgenre at some point because there's a lot of confusion. This book, I mean, it has a romance, but it doesn't really come into play until like 40-50% into the story. She definitely has more chemistry with her sentient spider plant than she does with any other person. It's very cozy. It does have a lot of interesting conversations that are happening. Magic is kind of forbidden in this place, and so she's opened up this jam shop, but it's really a front for magic and potions and things like that, and she is creating these potions to help the trees and the plants around the island, but because they are dying. And so there's a lot of conversation about climate change and the environment that we live in and trying to protect the planet, and I really liked that, but I think it got lost in a lot of the other things that were happening. There was so much happening in this book, and it's not a long book. And so I wish that we would have maybe like pared it down a little bit, really focused on a couple of things rather than trying to do like 5 or 6 things. Honestly, I think this book would have been fantastic if we would have stayed in the cozy fantasy lane, not had a romance, but then focused on this important conversation of climate change and of helping the planet. We didn't need the romance, honestly. And that's one of the things that I've always said with like romance books, when you're trying to determine that genre, is like, if you took the romance out of the story, is it still a full and complete story? And I feel like we can use that same argument for romantasy, and I think if we took the romance out of this book, we would still have a strong, complete story that we could have really focused on some important things. So this is not a romantasy to me. This is a fantasy that like has a romantic subplot, has some romantic elements in it. Anyways, I gave it 3 stars. I definitely see the audience for it, and I know a lot of people have really loved this book, so that's great. I love that for people, but it was not a free book. All right, the next project that I did in December was my TBR 2.0 Christmas vibe, where I put all of my TBR 2.0 books into stockings and then I randomly pulled them off of the shelves. I didn't love this. I mean, I loved the idea of it. It was a wonderful concept. I didn't love not having any say in what I was doing or not knowing what was going on. But honestly, it turned out really well. So the first book that I read for that was The Brightness Between Us by Elliot Schreffer. This is the sequel to The Darkness Outside Us, and it takes place both after that book and before that book. So there's not a lot I can tell you about this book because it will massively spoil the first book, but it takes place on the other planet, after the fact, and then also before the spaceship took off at the beginning of the first one. So it's like a prequel sequel kind of thing. I was a little disappointed in this book. I ended up giving it 3.5 stars. It was good, it was strong, but I think maybe I just had really high expectations because I absolutely loved The Darkness Outside Us. It is one of my favorite queer books of all time. It is a like sci-fi, but definitely more of a romance. And this book follows their journey afterwards on this new planet. And I don't know, I never connected with the new characters that we had in this story. I liked it for the fact that we had a little bit of some backstory, some interesting information that while we didn't need it for the first book, it was cool to have. It was really nice to really like fill out the world, fill out the story. But as its own book and like its own characters, its own story arc, it was disappointing. It was just a little bit lackluster. I was very whelmed by the book, honestly. I lied. I actually DNF'd 2 books because I also DNF'd His Majesty's Dragon by Naomi Novik. This is the first book in the Temeraire series, and it's a very much like a boy and his dragon type of story. It's a military fantasy where like he is the captain of a ship and then he gets a dragon egg. I only read about like maybe 100 pages of this book, so I wasn't very far into it, and I definitely forgot to put it on my tracking sheet, but I didn't care. I did not care about this book. I did not care about the story. I did not care about what was going on. I very much had to like make myself pay attention to the book and not let my mind wander, which is never a good thing. And this series is like 9 books long. So, I knew that I was probably going to give this book like 2.5 to 3 stars. And I was like, I'm not reading a series that's 9 books long when I didn't love the first one here. So we're just gonna skip it, and that's not gonna be a thing that happens. I just skipped it. I moved on. I DNF'd it. We were starting our 2025 resolution a little bit early, and we don't have time for mediocre books anymore. That's just how it is. In that book, I also read The Sanctuary of the Shadow by Aurora Asher. This is also a fantasy romance book, and I went into this with very low expectations. I think there might be like one person on BookTube that I watch that liked this book. Maybe 2. I don't know. Most people did not like this book, and I went into it with a lot of people telling me I wasn't going to like it because I like circus books, and this is kind of marketed as a circus book, and they're not really at the circus for very long. So I kind of knew that, and I knew going into it that it wasn't really what was marketed, and I just kind of went along for the ride. And you know what? I didn't hate the book. I gave it 3 stars, so like it was fine, but I was definitely going into it thinking like I was gonna DNF it within 50 to 100 pages, and I think it was kind of interesting. The magic system is really interesting. We have this conversation of like almost classism and trying to combat racism, but with elementals and these magical creatures that the rest of society looks down on, and our main character trying to protect him. Obviously there is a lot more to the story, and I think the first half was really good, and I think it was being set up for this really expansive world and this really expansive story, and then the second half was like, oh my god, we have to finish the book, we have to get it done, and it was so fast and so much different than the first one, and I started getting bored because I felt like I was getting left behind. The characters were really interesting. The smut, she can write smut. Those were some very, very spicy scenes, and I did love that. But as far as the overarching plot of the story, it was, again, I was whelmed. So I gave it 3 stars. I'm not going to continue on with the series. I think it's supposed to have a sequel. I don't know. I unhauled it. But then I also read The Housemids Secret by Frida McFadden. This is the second book in the Housemaid series, and this was a time, okay? This was so good. I gave it 4.5 stars. I probably could have given it 5, honestly, but I feel like there were times where I was like, okay, I know what you're trying to do. And maybe it's because I've read so much Frida McFadden this year that I kind of am starting to see a pattern in her unpredictability. Maybe that's what it is, because there were things that I definitely guessed about this story, but as a bingeable thriller, this was so much fun. It follows the character from the housemaid after the fact, and she kind of has this, you know, underground business happening where she is trying to help women out and get them out of dangerous situations. And so then she meets this couple, she starts working for them. It's very apparent that the woman is being abused, and then there's this whole thing, and things happen, okay? And then obviously, because it's a Frida McFadden book, right about the halfway mark, we completely flip gears, and it is definitely not what you thought it was when you went into it. And it was such a fun time, right? I read this book in one day, which is not hard to do with a Frida book. I just had the audiobook on, I was listening to it at work, I was listening to it all day long. I had a lot of driving that day. It was a good time. It was a very, very good time. So does Frida write literary masterpieces? No, of course not. But if you are in a slump, if you are trying to get back on the horse with reading, Frida is a really good place to go with that, because her books are very accessible. They're very easy to read and understand. She doesn't do a whole lot of like hiding things from you, and so you can really follow the story, but you're still surprised and there's still some sort of unexpected twist to it. All right, let's talk about the Christmas novellas. I read the Under the Mistletoe series. I read the Alexandra Bellafure story, Merriment and Mayhem, earlier, and so that one I gave 3.5 stars. I think I already talked about that one in a previous wrap up. But in December, I read 4 of the other 5. So the first one was Cruel Winter with You by Ali Hazelwood, and I definitely started out with the best one. I always want to sing Cruel Summer when I read this title. I know that that was intentional. This is a second chance romance with a like brother's best friend. If I remember correctly, I read a lot of Christmas novellas in a very short period of time, but this one I gave 4.5 stars. It was a very good time. I read it on sprints with my Patreon. There were moments that I highlighted in my Kindle. It was such a fun time. He is definitely a cinnamon roll. He's definitely a simp, and we love him. There was a line in the book where he said, oh, that guy doesn't deserve you. No one deserves you. And she says, well, what about you? And he goes, I most of all do not deserve you, but I'm going to try anyway. And you're just like, love that. Love that energy. Can we have more of that, please? So gave that one 4.5 stars. Really, really loved it. But then it kind of went downhill from there. The next one I read was All by My Elf by Olivia Dade. I gave this one 3 stars, and that's probably a little bit generous if I'm being 100% honest. It is interesting. This is about 2 workers who get stuck in like a traffic like pile up in a hot dog mobile. So that is a thing that happened. And so then they decide like, oh, we're gonna be here for a while. And so then they start playing Truth or Dare or Would You Rather, one of those like dumb games, right? And okay, well, they do it in a hot dog mobile. For why? Like why? How is that Christmas? Just because you're dressed up like an elf? I don't understand. I don't understand. I usually love Olivia Dade's books. They are usually a guaranteed favorite of mine, and this one was so disappointing. I'm just really glad it was short, because I probably would have DNF'd it if it was an actual full-length story. These characters were supposed to be older. I think this is like, of the 5, this one had the oldest of the like characters, but I don't know, they acted like teenagers the whole time. Then we had Merry Ever After by Tessa Bailey. I knew going into this one was everyone's least favorite. I had seen vlogs where people had talked about this one, and I would agree. I did give this one 3 stars, and here's the thing. This book I think would have been good as a full-length novel, but because we basically had to fit an entire romance arc into 50 pages, it felt really fast. Really, really fast. Also, the writing prompts for this collection had to have been, he has to be the largest man and she has to be the smallest woman. That's the only correlation that all of these books have in common together. Anyways, this man is very large. He doesn't fit into normal pants. He's that large. That's like, sounds so dumb. And she works at this consignment store. She's trying to help him, and you know, he can't find anything. So she's like, well, I'm gonna make you pants. She's never met him. Whatever. It's okay. And then we find out that she is a single mom. We don't really know that backstory. We're never really told about why, other than like, it's just, you know, it was a bad situation. Anyways, they end up, you know, getting it on, doing the thing with the baby in the other room, which is just a weird thing. I don't know, don't really love that. She ends up like giving him a baby carrier. She like, you know, hands him the baby. Ma'am, you met him 2 minutes ago. What? Do not, that's your child. But anyways, like, I think the concept, the outline of the story was good if it had 400 pages, because then we could like get to know the characters. We would understand the backstories. Both of our characters had like this traumatic backstory, this history about them, but like we don't get to dive into that. So as a concept, great. Needed about 350 more pages though, and then we could have actually told the proper story. And then finally we have Only Santa's in the Building by Alexis Daria. I was worried about this one because I had read from Alexis Daria before and I didn't really love her writing style, but I gave this one 4 stars and I really liked it. I again think that this one could have been longer. I would have loved to see a full story from this because we're really diving into the idea of grief and dealing with your first Christmas, your first holiday season after losing a loved one. She was very close to her grandmother, and so she just doesn't want to decorate for Christmas because they were her grandmother's ornaments and she just can't get herself to the storage place to get those ornaments out of storage. And so he starts bringing her ornaments and she thinks that it's somebody else, she thinks it's another neighbor, and then it like ends up being that he's just like trying to be this sweetheart, and it's really sweet, it's cute. I do think that this was a missed opportunity with the title though, because Only Santa's in the Building reminds me of the show Only Murders in the Building, and that's what I was kind of hoping for, to have a little bit of like a murder mystery plot to it. I don't know, but that's just me. Obviously the marketing did not indicate that. I just went in completely blind. Anyways, I gave this 4 stars. It was really cute, and I enjoyed it. It was a good one to end on for that collection. In that bag, I also read 2 Christmas books from Evie Mitchell. So I read the Mrs. Claus and You Slay Me. I really liked the Mrs. Claus. This is a Marriage on the Rocks book where the wife wants to have a baby. The husband does not. They live separately. They're basically only together on paper. And she goes to him saying like, hey, I want to have a baby. I'm going to try doing IVF, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, I will help you with that, but first let's try it the normal way first. Let's have a sexy Christmas. Then they do, and they have a wonderful weekend, and they fall in love, and it's very sexy, it's very steamy, and it was a perfect size. I think it was about 80 pages long, and it was such a good little like Christmas weekend tiny slice of Hallmark pie. You Slay Me, on the other hand, I only gave 2 stars to. This one didn't really feel like a Christmas book at all. It took place in December, but it wasn't really centered around Christmas. You could have put it at any other point in the year. It also was like this rock star romance, and I just like didn't get it. It was a pre-existing relationship. So it was second chance, and we were never really let into how their relationship worked prior to the book. And when you have a novella that has a pre-existing relationship, you do have to establish that connection really quickly, and I think that this book failed to do that. And then for the last of the Christmas novellas, I read Gifting Me to His Best Friend by Katie Roberts. I read another book from this series earlier. I think it was this year, might have been last year. I don't remember honestly. What is time at this point? This one I gave 4 stars to, and I think I could have given it 5 stars, but this was a really interesting relationship dynamic between a married couple and then his best friend. And so the best friend really had a thing for her, but also had a thing for him. So it was like a really interesting throuple situation. But anyways, the married couple, the husband, was like, I'm going to let my best friend basically like have his way with you. I'm going to watch. We're gonna have like a whole sexy Christmas thing in a Colorado cabin. That part of it was so good. And the part where the 3 of them were together, so hot, so spicy. It's Katie Roberts. Of course the smut is good. But there was one scene in there where the 2 of them were together without him. She was like, I want to try this. And so it was like consented to. Everyone discussed it beforehand, but they were trying to play out this fantasy of her cheating on her husband, and they kept talking about it in a way that it was like, we're cheating, and he's like, oh, you know, you have to be quiet, you have to like scream into the pillow because your husband will walk in. And that just like, it gave me the ick, and it took me out of the smut scene, but everything else was fantastic. And so I wish that they wouldn't have done that one thing, but that's just a personal trope problem for me. On Christmas Day, I always like to read a Christmas romance or a Christmas story. And so this year I read Make the Season Bright by Ashley Herring Blake. This is her Christmas story. It's the 2024 release. And to say I was disappointed with this book is probably an understatement. I ended up talking about this one in my worst books of the year. It wasn't a worst book, it was a disappointing book. But I gave it 2.5 stars, but like Ashley's books are normally 5 stars for me. And I really loved the found family aspect of this. I loved the queer community that she built in here, but this is a second chance romance where the 2 end up at a cabin together after one of them leaving the other at the altar. And so like there's not really a lot to come back from with that. If you leave someone at the altar, you don't get a second chance unless you are in witness protection. And that's the reason you didn't make it. Not just because you didn't feel like it or because you were having second thoughts. That's something you just talk about and communicate. And I don't know, it's just, this frustrated me. I just talked about this one a couple videos ago, so I'm not going to go into it. But yeah, it didn't work for me, unfortunately. Then the book that took my whole reading life by storm, a complete out of left field pick. It was on KU, and that was Queens of Moir by Rhiannon Hargan. And this ended up in my top 5 books of the year. So I'm not going to go into this one a lot, but this one has so much in the realm of fantasy romance. It's essentially if Scythe was a romantasy, but with so much more, right? Her mother is the evil queen who has a zombie army that they and the rest of the fates have to combat. There is a weird love triangle between the man that she is supposed to marry and then the man that she lusts after. And like there's a whole thing there. They all know that it's happening between the 3 of them. I don't know if it's going to end up as poly or if it's a weird love triangle, but at this moment I kind of like it both ways. She's doing a really good job with the love triangle because I can't tell which one she would end up with, and I think with a lot of love triangles you're like, it's not really a love triangle because we obviously know you're going to be with this person, not this person. I absolutely loved this. This is on KU, but I had to buy a physical copy of it because I was like, this is gonna be my best books of the year. I need a physical copy. And then I got it, and it has these really cool like skeleton like skulls. Anyways, absolutely loved it. Go watch my best books of the year if you want to hear me absolutely gush about this. I'm not gonna take up too much more of your time. Then the last week of the year I had Scatagorathon with my Patreon. I was vlogging it, but the vlog ended up not turning out at all, so I scrapped it, and here we are. I'm just gonna talk about them now. So the first one was Queen of Myth and Monsters by Scarlett St. Clair. This is the second book in the Adrienne and Isolde. I thought it was a duology. I guess it's not. There's another one coming out next year, and I feel like that's the problem. This book really lacked anything. It was so bland because I think maybe it was supposed to be a duology and now she's stretching it out, and this is very much middle book syndrome. I really enjoyed King of Battle and Blood. It was such a good romantasy. The characters had a lot of depth to them. There was a lot of banter. There was a lot of intrigue. And this one I feel like it just lost its soul. It didn't have that same feeling, and maybe it's because I just couldn't get into the story. I couldn't get in, like maybe it was because I had just read Queens of Moir and it was so amazing. And so this one just like felt lackluster to that, but it was fine. That's what it was. It was 3 stars. It's a book that existed. I'll definitely read more from Scarlett St. Clair. Maybe she just, you know, struggled with this one, didn't really know the direction she wanted to go with the story, especially if she ended up having to push it into 3 books. Then the second book that I DNF'd was The Archive of the Forgotten by AJ Hackwith. This one was so redundant. Okay, I really like The Library of the Unwritten. It is such a good fantasy. It has wonderful queer representation, and this one, the characters are just doing the same thing. It just felt redundant. Our characters were going through the same thing again. I got to about 30% and I just didn't care anymore. And I wasn't going to struggle through it. I wasn't going to push myself to then read the 3rd book. I was just like, you know, maybe we just pretend that The Library of the Unwritten was a standalone and it ends there and we can be done. I also think that this book was like more cozy and more humorous than I originally imagined the series being, and I don't know if it was much lighter than The Library of the Unwritten, or if that's just how my brain was inputting it. I don't know, but it was disappointing. It was really sad, unfortunately. Then the last book that I read on New Year's Eve, or I finished it on New Year's Eve, just to get it in at the very last minute, and that was The Serpent and the Wolf by Rebecca Robinson. This is a debut romantasy, and it definitely shows. It has a lot of promise, it has a lot of hope, but dear God, is there a lot of info dumping in this book. I was on Sprints with Brittany when I was talking about this book, and I was like, this reminds me of when you start a Star Wars movie and it has that wall of text, and you're just like, okay, like this is how we're setting up the world. I knew everything about the politics of this world, about the government and how it was set up, and about the magic systems, and about these different, you know, select people and things like that, and how the government was run. Everything except how the characters felt about what was going on. I do appreciate that the author did not info dump in the dialogue. That is something that is definitely a pet peeve of mine, because like the characters wouldn't actually say that. Like they wouldn't talk to a friend that already knows that just because you as the reader don't know that. So I'm glad that the author didn't do that, but it did take you out of the story. And I was like, okay, if it's at the very beginning, that's fine. We can just get into the world. And honestly, knowing too much is sometimes better than not knowing anything at all. You know, harken back to when I was talking about When the Moon Hatched, and it was like a really long time ago at the very beginning of this video, but if you're still here, you are the real ones. So I appreciate that we had the information. I just think that it shows that it was a debut author because it wasn't really seamlessly woven into the story in a way that you almost didn't know you were getting an info dump. Like I knew we were getting an info dump, and it was like a lot of information, Okay, and scene. I do think that the world is fascinating. I think that the setup for this book is really cool, and I will be reading the second book when it comes out. This is a brand new release, so it's gonna be a while, but I still was interested in it. I was intrigued by it, and the end of the story really ramped up, and I like read the last, I think 30% of this book in one sitting, just like sitting on my couch trying to finish my genre blanket. So I'm definitely not mad that I read it. I'm not mad that it was my last book of the year. That wraps up 2024. I will be doing a statistics video probably sometime next week. You will see that, where I will be talking about the different genres that I read, all of my ratings, all of my, you know, the fun nerdy statistics. I'll do that all next week, but I did want to close out the year of reviews. Now we can move into 2025. It's going to be a fantastic year. Let me know down in the comments below what you read in December that you absolutely loved. Doesn't have to be like a favorite, but like something you loved and you want to shout about from the rooftops. And if you are not feeling chatty, well, you gotta do the snake emoji. If you do want to check out some of my best and worst books from 2024, I will have my best books video right here and my worst books video right here. Pick your poison, I guess. That is all I have for you today. If you are new here and you have not yet subscribed, there's a little button you can do so down below the video. If you'd like to hang out with me more, the links to my Instagram, Goodreads, Twitter, and my Patreon are linked in the description below. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye!